In this episode, we're looking at changing regulation and compliance in hospitality at the HOSPA regional event in Manchester, hosted by Focus on Hospitality. In this hotel panel with Rob McGlynn, Operations Director, Supercity Aparthotels, Matthew Bell, Managing Director at Mollies, and Kelly Cronin, Revenue and Commercial Director at Village Hotels, we look at how to remain on the right track, managing risk, supporting the team, and ensuring the business is future-proof. We look at specific compliance affecting the sector, where there needs greater attention from a regulatory framework, and why guests seek experience over service more than ever before.
Hotelier's Voice. Exploring opportunity in hospitality with Ryan Haynes. Hear from the people making a difference. From revenue to operations, marketing to digitalization, learn the thinking behind their decisions.
I kick off by asking Rob to set the scene and give us an overview of Supercity Aparthotels.
We currently have 8 operating properties, soon to be 9. We're due to get York online in the next 2-3 months. We opened Edinburgh and Leeds last summer, and we've got 4 London sites, 1 in Brighton and 1 here in Manchester. We're an Aparthotel operator. We operate between around 60 to 70 units per site. We get to get across some opportunities maybe the big players, the stay cities of the world wouldn't be interested in. And we find that's quite a sweet spot for us, because when you're operating sort of that size, you don't really need the ancillary services. You don't need the food and beverage. You don't need all that comes along with it. We can operate a very lean model. We're about 130 staff across the 8 properties. When we're up to full chat, I think we're about 145 across 9 sites, which is a very lean operation, which helps us drive that sort of bottom line a little bit easier.
I mean, it's obviously a sector that's been growing quite fast over the last few years. When we look at sort of some of those performance data that we've seen earlier today from both James and Peter, are you seeing something similar, or how is it behaving in your business?
I think coming out of the pandemic, I think there was a big shift. I think people wanted that additional benefits. The sort of bleisure was the really horrible word that came out a few years ago. Like sort of went away as well. But it was sort of people like going away maybe on a Saturday and staying through till Monday, and because they had business in that city on a Monday. But yeah, we found that obviously people were looking for more full service. Something that, for example, came out of the pandemic is when people came back was they wanted Netflix on the telly. They didn't want just terrestrial. Or we had Sky TV, and everybody complained, we don't want Sky TV. Like, okay, so they wanted them integrated solutions. But yeah, just in terms of the data that we saw earlier, it's not. It's a bit skewed because we look at hotel data. What we're not looking at is the residential and the Airbnb data that's got, I think, 12,000 apartments have been built in Manchester in the last 6 years. Go on Airbnb now, I'm sure you'll see over 100 of them on there. And what they're doing is they're able to operate in our space without all the compliance, without all the regulation. And I think we're going to have an incident probably in the near future where there's no smoke alarm, batteries in the smoke alarm, and there'll be a thing of, well, this guest listed it on booking.com. They bought it yesterday, listed on booking.com today, sold it for tomorrow. And it's a challenge that we have to compete with these. And I think if you look at cities like New York or Las Vegas, where they look after their hospitality industry, because Airbnb was regulated, minimum 30 night stays unless it's, I think, in your own domain. And that, what it did is it restored some housing supply back to it, but it also protected the hospitality industry. We're all constantly looking at how do we save on the bottom line. Well, we need to start with the regulation of protecting the hospitality industry.
So essentially a threat to Airbnb properties is increasing compliance and regulation. And potentially what our sector could be doing is actually campaigning to ensure that compliance and regulation is adhered to across any commercially sort of rented or hired space.
Yeah, and we're part of the ASAP, which is the Association of Service Department Providers, and they've been campaigning for years to try and get this regulation or registration system or something that gives a level of compliance that means they have to obviously maintain a certain level of standard. I'm not all about outlawing these small, but obviously these are damaging. I mean, it's a sort of a race to the bottom in some cities of there's just so much supply. And obviously you come to Manchester, lots of hotels opening. Congrats on your new one opening as well. But we constantly we're adding a visitor charge to subvent business into the city. But well, look, if we just protect the hoteliers that are in the city, we can all benefit. We'll employ more people. We're currently, I think, a race to the bottom in terms of everybody's on minimum wage. I'm quite proud that Supercity's a real living wage accredited employer. This year, that's gone up 7%. Our costs, our linen costs have gone up 5 or 6%. We're not seeing the profits go up that much either. If anything, they're being decimated. So the more regulation around the short-term lets, I think will benefit not only Aparthotels, but hotels in general.
Thank you. I mean, there's so much more to deconstruct, but we will do it in time. I'll move over to Kelly. So, Village Hotels, start off with, who are you?
So we are 34 hotels now, as of 2 weeks ago, when we opened Reading. We're pretty unique as a hotel concept in the UK. So we position ourselves as everything under one roof. So as well as the bedrooms, we also have VWorks, our co-working space, which is membership driven. Our leisure clubs, which every hotel has between 3,000 and 6,000 leisure club members. So we've got over 140,000 across our estate. A retail Starbucks. So by that, I mean like a high street Starbucks that you would see on the high street. So the whole setup is like walking into one in Manchester city centre. And then pub and grill, as well as meeting and event space. So really, I suppose we're trying to secure a type of customer that wants that sort of pleasure almost blended, might be a remote worker, can move seamlessly between workout to workspace to be able to sleep, eat, great food and meet their colleagues if they want to. We've spent quite a lot of time on that customer journey piece and really understanding the different customers in our different verticals and how they all link together. And creating a single unified customer view is actually a lot harder than what you would think, given that all operate quite different data platforms. So, yeah, that's us.
I mean, it's fascinating. The more I've got to know Village, because again, congratulations on opening new properties, and you've got more in the pipeline.
We've got a lot more, yeah.
Certainly what we learned at AHC.
Not city centre, guys, though. So I'm okay. I'm sat here quite a comfortable space.
Now, one of the things that you pointed out, and I know you and I had our first conversations around, was the fact that you've got all these kind of business units that have worked very independently to one another. And as you say, you're trying to get this unified view of who your customer is and how you cross-sell then more effectively to them. You talked about a data platform. How is that progress going at the moment?
So it's going well. I think we've spent a huge amount of time really planning for this because there is different motivations also attached to each one of those business perspectives. So just to give you an example, Ryan, if you were a member at our, Leeds property, but you live near Edinburgh, but you go on leisure breaks to Watford because your kids love Harry Potter, and you go to Starbucks near a station that you meet a colleague, it's really hard to actually connect all those moving parts. And I think we have spent a lot of time finding the right supplier, first of all, and the right data consolidation platform, and then working out as a business kind of the so what, because I think we generate so much data and all of our businesses generate so much data, but actually it's overwhelming and it's overloading to even start to look at it. And if you can't draw any meaningful conclusions that drive action and improvement, then you have to ask yourself the question of why you're doing it in the first place. So I think we really started off with that objective in mind of like, what are we trying to achieve here and how will it better not only our bottom line, but also our customer experience? Like, will you feel the benefit as a customer as a result in us being, moving into a much more hyper-personalised world where you really feel we get you, as opposed to moving in silos in, your little different worlds. Because we all have them. We all have a job. We all have a family. We all have a social circle. We're different people within all of those. And I think that's a challenge for any brand at the moment, to secure, that total value of a customer when they have very different needs in each one of those personas.
Let alone complying with data regulations.
Yeah, data regulations is also, a big part of this project. And as well, we want to do the right thing by our customers. So we have to understand that there is the data compliance, of course there is, but even outside of that, is it what people want? And actually, what is the right amount of communication? What is the right messaging? So I think we've blended the compliance piece. I mean, I'm not going to pretend to be the expert in, in all of that. We have a great team that help us with that. But I think we also have spent a long time, like I say, really talking to customers and non-customers and understanding why they aren't our customers. which can...
Because, I mean, data, when I talk to different hoteliers about data and different systems about data, and we talk about data interfacing and integrations between systems, it's how many data points do you collect? And obviously they say, well, the more the better. But then, as you say, it can be overwhelming. What's the point? But I guess you want to look at incrementing that where you possibly can, or disposing of certain data at certain points where you don't see the value in it.
Yeah, without doubt. I mean, that you want ultimately the customers that are going to drive that, that optimization of revenue through your business. And there are a category of customers that are not going to do that. They are going to be, the people that only ever want the deals or want the higher discounts. And there's a place for that. There's an absolute place for that. We've all got need periods when we're really happy for those. But ultimately, there's an element, I guess, as well of like we're moving into what does loyalty really mean? Is loyalty about instant reward? Is it about points? What does that look like, and how does it, slot into the business? The way that we bring the data into the system and the way we've tried to like pull it all together. One of the biggest challenges has been the anonymisation of data. So, if you look at, you'll all be the same in the room, 50% of your reservations that are coming in, you don't know who they are. You know their name, but you don't know, the OTAs do a very good job of protecting their customer before they arrive. So a big part of this project has actually been, once they're over your threshold, are you doing everything you possibly can to secure that customer? Because in a way, more fool us if we're not, because we're just sending them back to the OTAs. The OTAs can't control our customer experience. They can't control the fact that we ask them for that detail on arrival, and then we market to them direct and make them realise that there's a direct message there to be had. There's a place for OTAs in our business. We have very strong partners with our partnerships with our distribution partners, but ultimately that is a big challenge, anonymised data, because everyone is chasing the same customer and wants to protect that customer, with all their worth. Booking.com and so on, they want those people to go back to them and choose not to book direct. So it's the battle for direct is interesting one, isn't it?
And we'll come over to Matthew Bell now, the managing director at Mollies. So Mollies.
So Mollies was born out of a vision that we could do roadside better, and looked at the Premier Inns and the Travelodges of this world. And don't get me wrong, I'd kill to be as successful as what they've done, Whitbread have done with Premier Inn. So we are definitely a challenger brand within that space. But the idea was actually why, how do we create that roadside concept and actually understand that budget doesn't need, with budget can come also a strong level of design, aspiration and quality within that space. So cheap doesn't need to miss the principles of great design. And I think that the link into the Americana, the idea of the motel, I think is quite interesting because it paints that picture of possibilities. There's a slightly sort of that notion of the free road, the open space. I think is quite appealing in a world today that's a bit constrained. I think there's a lot of bad news in that space, and actually the slightly more indulgent idea of what Mollies it represents, I think, sells quite well to people. The story is that there is a lady called Mollie. I mean, there wasn't. This is the story, the narrative. There's a lady called Mollie who had a diner, and she had a bit of land out the back of her, out the back, and she thought she'd put some rooms in there. But it means that it's a very diner-led proposition. So we are 50% of our business is food and beverage. 50% comes from rooms. You can imagine the profitability is slightly different on that basis, but we are a very F&B forward product in terms of what we do. And it's a really important part for how we position our product and really make sure we focus on delivering standalone performance of the diner away from the bedroom piece. And then the site here in Manchester is our third product. First city centre product, and it's quite an evolution from the first two, with single inventory in the first two properties. Here we've gone from having sort of 18 square metre bedrooms to sort of 70 square metre apartments within the space. So there's quite some evolution of the product. The F&B is now integrated into the hotel. Before the two properties, it's separate. So some efficiencies to be found, but we have a very large lobby. We have some. We also have live performance space downstairs. So all part of the positioning of Mollies as that sort of premium brand. But we still believe that we can deliver this at a very affordable price point. So that notion of value luxe is really important part to Mollies. I joined the company a year ago. I spent 11 years with Citizen M. Joined when we were 3, left when we were 33, pre the selling of the IP to Marriott, but helped it scale. And I think that is really the idea. We do something similar with Mollies, is get to scale with this owner operated model.
So in look at that career trajectory, from system to Mollies and sort of the changing world of regulation and compliance. What would you say are you most grappling with over the last couple of years? What's sort of really giving you headaches when it comes to looking at how do you make sure your business is successful and doesn't fall miss compliance or issues around regulation?
Yeah, and so look, I think that they've been touched on two of the key issues that you see around regulation or the lack of regulation within certain components of what happens within the business, and yet within the bigger groups and Mollies up until recently below the 250 employee means that we can sort of dodge some of that regulation. Manchester takes us above that level, which increases both as a brand we increase our visibility, but actually we move into a different section from a compliance perspective. Citizen M, interesting because it was multinational. So we weren't only dealing with compliance in a single environment. We're doing that across the US, across Europe, and European law brought some consistency within that, but also into Asia in terms of what that looked like, and actually operated in China, which brought us some interesting complications around where your data was sat. We were on, for example, in Citizen M, we operate on the Google platform principally from a productivity suite, but we couldn't run that in China. So all sorts of bits and pieces within that space. And so it's just a constantly evolving market that you have to, or space that you have to be on top of, you have to be aware of. And at the same time, I think you have to make sure that you don't let it run your business. So I think compliance has to happen by definition. You sort of have to be putting it in place. But then there's a lot of other stuff that's wrapped around it. And I think navigating that part, which is actually what is the right decision for your business? How are you assessing the risk? Am I creating value for employee, for customer, for the business? You have to look at that holistically and really making those decisions. Otherwise, it will eat you alive. And for the reasons we talked about, you talk about Airbnb, but it's also the same thing with ghost kitchens from a food and beverage perspective. It's not an equal playing field at the moment. And this sort of notion of a compliance tax is definitely the case. We made decisions to achieve B Corp status because it was important for us to demonstrate that we believe in doing the right thing. We think that has an important commercial value in our business. It gives assurance to the customer because, we believe in doing the right thing genuinely as a purpose-led brand. I think you talked about it a bit in terms of that idea of the marketing component of what people are really buying. And that's important to us with our brand. And security of customer, where a customer feels safe within your space is really important. And at the same time, you cannot allow compliance to eat you alive because everyone will be spending more time making sure that you are 100% compliant and not enough time in actually delivering the product. And actually, you won't be there at the end of it for all the cost that it's got. So we have to navigate that complexity. And I think we do have to push hard to make sure there's an equal playing field because the unscrupulous operator, introduces the legislation. They don't follow it anyway. So actually, who's paying? It's the person that was following it in the first place is now paying even more to be that they are compliant, while the unscrupulous operator still continues to play within the shadows. And I don't have the answer for that. I did read politics at university, but I can't answer that question, which is how do you get hold of the unscrupulous operator? Don't punish the person that does the right thing, because it's important that we do the right thing. But I think we just ultimately have to make sure that we make really strong cases, and the unscrupulous operator we come down hard on them because the impact of that has to be strong on their business because incentive at the moment probably is not there enough for them to do the right thing.
Kelly, if I come to you, you were talking about the fact that when you're doing your data, you've got a team of people that sort of look at sort of the regulatory and compliance side of things. So who do you turn to? Who helps you better understand sort of like the perimeters or the changes that may affect you, your role, your team, and then keep your team up to date with what's going on?
We have multiple sources. I think probably as a business, we take a very proactive view of this. So I think we've built relationships over a prolonged period of time that when we partner with people, part of that agreement and that conversation from the supplier, from that initial meeting is around this isn't, you aren't a supplier or a partner, and partners help each other. And we have an in-house legal counsel who works with a team of lawyers, and that team of lawyers for the business in lots of different respects is very supportive with some of that. Same with our digital agencies, right the way. And I'm kind of using legislation across multi-faceted areas of the business. Same with our leisure, and health and safety. So I think there's things that go right through, isn't there, right through the business when you think about compliancy, from like I guess safety, right? Data as we talked about, that you could keep going. There's so many different points, but I think moving yourself into that proactive headspace and making it part of your daily conversation. We have, when we do owner meetings with our owners, risk and compliance is a section that we actively talk about. It's a weekly agenda item in our exec get-togethers. So I think you can't isolate it as a thing. It has to be woven into your business, so that also it generates a bit of an environment of people feeding you information, and also helping you in local markets. And it's not maybe from terms of legal standpoint, but for everyone that's affected by the Edinburgh levy at the moment, I know there's people in the hotel, in the room that have hotels in Edinburgh. I mean, this has been, it's going to be one of the hardest tourist levies to even consider. Finding out what is legislation and what is just because they've kind of agreed it is there's different components of it, and it's clearly been there's clearly been conversations in there that hasn't really consulted with hoteliers, because I'm sure a lot of people in this room would have said we can't actually physically do that in our systems. But I think that we've used the hotel team to actually really leverage that relationship in that local area and try and get into the testing environments and into the understanding the separation out of the legality side, and then, as I say, the kind of more like subjective side. And that's really helped. But you kind of can't be all things to all men. You've got to turn to expertise. There's no other way. There's no way of doing it. So, maybe that's a situation that everyone could find themselves in, is when you have those initial conversations, open that up of what information, how can you help us with some of these challenges that we will have on an ongoing basis broadly, right?
Interesting perspectives there. I mean, as you say, new things keep coming in all the time. What are you most worried about or concerned about, or would like perhaps? You mentioned certain change you'd like, but anything you're particularly worried or concerned about when it comes to regulation or compliance?
I think it was touched on earlier with obviously the business rates. I mean, some of our properties' rateable value has gone up 180%. And our business rates next year will be up 45%. It's a huge jump that's going to be very difficult for us to, obviously we'll obviously absorb it, but it's how do you battle that on the front line. And like I sort of said, is the real living wage has gone up, I think 6.9% in London, 6.7% in the rest of the UK, and we're part of that, and it makes it very much more difficult for us to be able to maintain that and that obligation to our employees. But from that is what if we don't? And then I think everybody's feeling it. And like you said, as you cut the staff, maybe you don't do more generous increases, and what you do then is you create an industry that everybody's like, well, they pay minimum wage. Like, well, we don't want to go in there. And I think there's 3.5 million people that work in the hospitality sector in the UK. I think it's the third or fourth biggest in the UK. We've got to be doing more from a government perspective. They've got to be doing more to protect us and to help drive people into our industry, and just putting their hand in our pockets for bigger business rates and stuff like that is not the way to do that. It's if anything, it's going to be counterintuitive to the success of the hospitality industry as well. And similarly with the Edinburgh city tax of 5%, and that's going to be going to affordable housing and stuff like that, which I think is something that's important. But why should the hoteliers stump up for that? It just seems a bit, or not even the hoteliers, but the people visiting. Here in Manchester, obviously we have the city visitor charge, was the first place to do it, and that goes directly into subventing business into the city and driving that visitor economy. That's what it should be for, and it is a mess up there. We're up there as well, and it's. I
think I spoke to a few people in this room. I think that's a resounding.
Yeah, it's a real mess up there, and I just think the government, there's no representative really for hospitality sector in the government. So I think that's probably where we're missing a step in terms of having some real representation for our interests, especially given the amount of people that work in the industry.
Budget really last November's just paved the way now to do more of it, haven't they?
Yeah. And it's just short-sighted, and I think that's sometimes the trouble with the sort of short government is they're not looking at the long term, they're just looking at the short-term fixes, and it seems like hospitality gets pushed back, because I know for the Association of Service Department Providers, they were driving the Conservatives about this registration scheme, and then Labour's obviously come in and it's been pushed right down to the bottom, so they're going to have another 4 or 5 years of bringing it back up to the top. Another change in government, it falls away, and it's just very short-term measures, and there's no sort of long-term vision for how we're going to make hospitality and hotels and the sector thrive.
Matt, based on your experience, what way do you think we could have, as an industry, a bit more influence, or try to get our voice perhaps heard rather than just noticed?
Yeah, so I think there are bodies that are doing an excellent job in the lobbying of it. I think that I wouldn't at any point want to suggest that there's necessarily even more that can be done within that space. I think they're operating within, we know, the very complex socio-political economic environment. I mean, it is wild at the moment in terms of what's happening within that space. And I said I read Politics University. I don't know what the solution is per se, but I think that you see that the political cycle, the short-termism, like I'm again across it, the impact of social media in terms of what that means, and the algorithms that are creating false narratives. I think all of that stuff is such an incredibly complex space in which it can be navigated. So I'm not going to sit here and say that just do more doesn't necessarily get us there, because I think these are broader sort of socio-political challenges that are being faced. I do think that there is a piece in looking at that we are shooting ourselves in the foot, and you see that at, say, with the budget in terms of the impact of the change in the national minimum wage for that younger age group. So everything that you're doing is moving away from creating great opportunity within hospitality to create life skills, to create income. I mean, I don't know how many people in this room started in hospitality when they were sort of 16, 17, 18, but it's such an amazing opportunity, and particularly around leadership. I mean, how quickly you can get and understand and move into leadership in hospitality. That aside from the technical element of hotels, that very simple principle of what it is to positively influence people, and again that the same movement of how you're creating this faceless element of hospitality through Airbnb, through ghost kitchens, and technology allows for it, but in that destruction of the high street and identity. So in a world where we're craving to be part of a community and a space and positive feelings, actually a lot of the legislation seems to be pushing away from that part, the destruction of the high street, those obvious centres to be more social. And I think that so regulation around social media I think is incredibly important. I know it's controversial, but I think it's a really important piece for what that means for the younger generation, because I think that realising that hospitality is more than selling a bed, it's about deeper human personal connections, sits at the heart of what we're ultimately trying to do. And you can put as much technical element around it, but this is about how you make people feel, whether that's a team member or a customer. And I think that in the race to find the financial part, government are forgetting it, business is forgetting it, but the customer isn't. The customer desperately wants it. They've got the money to spend, and differentiating yourself on how you make people feel is what is going to be the real winner in this space.
Kelly, across the different business units, so many of them, there has been a profound change in what we're expecting as customers today, and what their expectations are and how they feel that experience. Yeah. Is there any particular areas that you've had to adapt parts of Village and what it delivers or how it provides hospitality?
Yeah, I mean, our leisure club is probably the biggest example of that, because I think they've evolved so massively in the last 10 years, from being, a place that people went to the gym and they went to a class or went for a swim, to actually now there's a social value that they add to people's lives. And it's not just around a workout piece, it's also around, I think you and I actually had the conversation about our membership is continually growing and our subscription rates are still moving up with very little resilience. But that's because if you're a person that works out with, after work, you bring your kids for a swim on a Saturday and you take them for Starbucks afterwards, we're providing that space, and actually we're adding a huge amount of value to not only kind of your health, but also your how you feel. Like you said, that whole concept of, the kids are excited to go swimming, parents are excited because they're taking the kids, it's the treat afterwards, it's creating emotion in people. And I think in our leisure space, we've moved quite dramatically into more around health and wellness. So, thinking about outdoor fitness, people, the benefits of fresh air, to we've put Reformer Pilates in, which is very recently, paddle courts are going in. So it's really offering that choice. And I think that's what all of this comes down to, is choice, is that we've got to, as a hospitality industry, realise there are people that will want the check-in where they don't see anyone. I mean, system very similar to Village with kiosk check-in, and but there's still a team member there if you want it. You can do your entire journey on book online if you so wish, but you can also, if you really want to give us a call, you can. And I think it's that choice perception. I think actually most of negative customer experiences come because we've created rules that we've then invoked on somebody on something that they actually didn't want. I think when we're talking about evolution of businesses, this is where our AI plays a part. If we're reducing the amount of people we've got due to cost constraints, which we're all having to do, then taking some of those menial tasks, and AI is quite a scary concept. We were talking before about there's a lot of people at operator level that don't feel they can really impact that because it's decisions that are made by corporate offices or it involves big spends. But actually, just thinking about bots taking away manual processes, we don't have any of our host desks charging VCCs or attaching correspondence so accounts know when they're invoiced. It's all done by bots, and that's freed up the people to be those people to create experiences. And then the money that you're paying for those people, the value you're getting as a business, because you're actually allowing them to do their jobs and not be like bound down in things that are demotivating because they're doing the same thing every day, menial, or it feels menial, and they're having to actually guess waiting because they're having to deal with this sort of admin of process. So I think AI can take on lots of different formats, but I think sometimes really simplify it in what are the key pain points that stop your team getting to be able to do that experience thing in a really happy, sociable, engaging space. And for us, it was definitely the pull down of manual processes for sure.
And I'm sorry to cut that short, but we did open the conversation to the room. And if you'd like to be involved in these sessions, please look out for the HOSPA regional events or focus on hospitality events. The next is in Edinburgh on the 17th of March. I'm Ryan Haynes, and this is Hotelier's Voice.